The medieval peasant's home was dark and cold, without electricity or modern candles. Living in such darkness was a real challenge, especially in the harsh winters, when disease and cold lurked at every turn. In the early Middle Ages, light was not just a convenience, but a symbol of hope and protection. Women maintained the hearth, men toiled in the fields, and children learned survival skills from a young age. Light helped to live, work, and keep faith. How did peasants light their dwellings in conditions of perpetual darkness? What simple and sometimes unexpected methods did they use to dispel the gloom and keep warm? Today we will reveal 10 forgotten lighting methods that still work today. Ready to learn the secrets of medieval life? Then let's get started. The fire lamp is a primitive fixture. In the depths of a medieval village, when night fell and darkness reigned outside the window, a simple fire lamp, a primitive lamp familiar to mankind since ancient times, came to the peasant's aid. It was based on stones with cutouts or small hollows, which craftsmen filled with fat, melted or thick, and placed a wick in the middle. Such a lamp was both a source of heat and light in houses without windows or in small huts, where candles and oil lamps were a luxury. The stones for the lamps were chosen for a reason. Most often they were flat or slightly recessed cobblestones made of clay, sandstone, or limestone, materials that could withstand heat well. The hollow could be round or oval in shape to hold enough fat. In some regions, wooden bowls soaked in resin were also carved, but stone bowls were more durable. Fat for lamps came from a variety of sources. Animal fat, pig, sheep, or bovine, was the most common because it was the easiest to obtain on the farm. Fish oil, derived from dried livers of cod or other sea creatures, was used primarily in coastal areas where fishing was the main industry. Fish oil burned brightly but had a pungent odor, which was not always to the liking of the household. Making fat for the lamp was a laborious task. The fat was cleaned of impurities, melted and strained to remove particles of meat and bones. Otherwise, the flame was unstable and smoky. After pouring the fat into the stone bowl, a wick was inserted, usually made of linen or hemp fibers, tightly twisted into a bundle. Sometimes the wick was soaked in melted wax to increase the burning time. The effectiveness of the fire lamp was limited, but in a medieval village, it was enough light to read a book by moonlight or prepare for night labor. The flame burned with a soft yellowish light, giving a faint but warm enough illumination that did not frighten the eyes in a dark room. The lamp, however, required constant attention. The fat had to be refilled regularly, and the wick had to be adjusted and trimmed to avoid excessive smoke and soot. The important thing was that the fire lamp was available to almost everyone. It could be made by one's own hands using whatever was at hand. In archaeological excavations in Europe and the Middle East, similar stone bowls with fat residues are found, testifying to a 1,000-year tradition. It is known that in ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, such lamps served not only in the household, but also in cult rites, symbolizing the light of life and knowledge. In medieval Europe, they continued to be used until the appearance of glass oil lamps and candles. Even with the development of technology, however, the simple fire lamp remained in use in poor neighborhoods and fields without access to expensive light sources. These lamps were an integral part of family life during long winter evenings around peasant hearths. They illuminated handicrafts such as weaving, embroidery, and clothing repair, and accompanied the stories and legends of old men. Sometimes lamps were placed in dens, barns, and even on the outer walls of houses to mark the way for travelers. The simplicity of construction did not prevent these lamps from being reliable. The stone vessel did not break from the fire and did not melt as wooden bowls could. The fat burned for a long time, with proper care, several hours without interruption. But in rainy weather, when the wind obscured the flames, one had to seek shelter or use additional windshields. In knights' castles and monasteries, where more expensive lamps were made of metal and glass, fire lamps were still in use, in outbuildings, cellars, and gatehouses. Sometimes they were decorated with carvings or drawings, turning them into a small art object. But more often, the lamp was just a utilitarian object, necessary for survival and comfort. Today, historians and reenactors are rediscovering this ancient way of lighting by studying archaeological finds. In modern workshops and survival camps, the fire lamp becomes a symbol of connection to the past and a reminder of how man learned to wield light using the simplest materials and great ingenuity. Wax and fat candles. In the medieval home, where the fire lamp was a simple source of light, candles made of wax and animal fat occupied a special place. They became not just a practical object, but a symbol of wealth and social status. Making candles was laborious and expensive, especially when it came to beeswax. Beeswax was prized above all else. It was extracted from the hives by collecting honeycombs, melted and purified to produce a pure material. The wax burned brightly and evenly, giving off a pleasant, almost honey-like aroma. Such light was soft and warm, did not smoke, and did not give off an unpleasant odor. That is why beeswax candles were often used in churches and in the homes of the nobility, where the light had not only a utilitarian value, but also a sacred one. At the same time, wax was a scarce resource. Bees in the Middle Ages were not bred everywhere, but only on wealthy estates or in monasteries. For an ordinary peasant, a candle made of wax remained a dream because its price was high. Therefore, the main material for candles was most often animal fat. Fat of a pig, sheep, or cattle. Lard candles burned worse, smoky and smelled far less pleasant than wax candles. They melted quickly and required constant attention. The wick had to be trimmed to reduce soot. Despite this, these candles were widespread among ordinary people. They were more affordable and allowed to light up homes on long winter evenings when sunlight was rare. Historical sources testify that in European cities, there were even craft guilds specializing in the production of wax candles. Their products decorated the homes of wealthy citizens, monastery halls, and halls of noble castles. In England of the 13th century, a special tax was imposed on beeswax, indicating its high value and demand. Candles made of wax became not just a source of light, but a real element of luxury. Noble ladies decorated them with precious candlesticks made of bronze or silver, and castles organized festive candlelight evenings, which created a special atmosphere of comfort and celebration. Candles were often given as gifts, especially in church circles, as a symbol of spiritual light and purity. For ordinary people, lard was the only option. The fat was melted from fresh lard, cleaned and cast into molds, sometimes just made of tree bark or clay. These candles were quickly lit and would last until all the fat was burned out. Their flames were dull, but practical and affordable. Monasteries were able to combine both materials. Wax candles burned in churches, while household needs were met with fat candles. Monastic records preserve information about large stocks of wax, which was purchased or received as a gift for divine services. Thus, wax became a symbol of holiness and purity, and lard a symbol of everyday life. Interestingly, in some countries, such as Russia, even commoners tried to improve the quality of candles by adding tar or other softening ingredients to lard. This helped to reduce smoke and prolong the burning time. By the end of the Middle Ages, the first forms of factory production of candles appeared. In the cities, there were special workshops where candles were made quickly and en masse. This gradually reduced their price and widened their availability. But in the hinterland, peasants continued to use traditional methods. Today, historians and reenactors often reproduce candles made of wax and fat to show what life was like for the common man in the Middle Ages. Each glowing wick reminds us that light in the night has always been a precious gift, and the ability to obtain it is part of the everyday art of survival. Wick and its materials. At the center of every lamp, be it a simple fire lamp or an elegant wax candle, is the wick, the invisible hero that time after time gave light in the dark nights. In the Middle Ages, making a wick was a craft that required knowledge and experience. Various materials were used for its creation, from natural plant fibers to fabric from old scraps. One of the most common materials for wicks was flax. Linen fibers were strong, absorbed fat or wax well, and burned slowly, providing a stable flame. Flax was grown on almost every peasant's plot, and therefore such a wick was available to many. Flax fibers were twisted into bundles or woven into thin strips of cloth, which allowed to adjust the thickness and, accordingly, the brightness of the glow. Another popular material was cotton cloth. In countries where cotton was available, it became a favorite choice for wicks. Cotton burned smoothly and almost odorlessly, especially if it was carefully treated and washed. Sometimes, to improve the quality of the wick, cotton thread was soaked in salt solutions to reduce soot and prolong burning. However, specially prepared materials were not always used. Often, wicks were woven from rags, old linen or cotton fabrics cut into narrow strips. These strips were soaked in fat or wax and carefully twisted. Such a wick might not burn as long and brightly, but it was cheap and easily accessible. Interestingly, some regions used plant fibers other than linen and cotton. For example, in Northern Europe, hemp was often used, which was strong and absorbent. In other places, nettle fibers or even silk threads were used for wicks for more expensive lamps. The quality of the wick directly influenced the lighting effect. A thick, poorly twisted wick could burn too brightly, but at the same time quickly consume fat or wax, smoke, and smoke. Thin gave a dim light that barely illuminated the room. A medium-thick wick, evenly twisted and well-soaked, was considered ideal. Medieval craftsmen knew the secrets of how to prepare the wick to burn long and evenly. Sometimes the wick was soaked in a salt solution or dipped in a mixture of fat and herbs, which reduced soot and gave the flame a soft glow. Such tricks were handed down from generation to generation as an important household experience. Historical documents preserve references to specialized craftsmen, wick makers, who were engaged only in the manufacture and sale of ready-made wicks. In large cities, it was a full-fledged trade, and their products were valued for their quality and reliability. In monasteries, wicks were made in workshops where recipes and rules were followed exactly, because not only the rituals but also the monk's daily routine depended on the light. A bright and even light allowed to read texts and pray even at late hours. It is known that at the royal courts and rich castles on a special account were silk wicks, which burned clean and beautiful, served as a decoration of expensive candlesticks, and emphasized the status of the owner. However, in most homes in the countryside and among the lower classes, practicality reigned. The wick was made from whatever was at hand, taking care of functionality above all. Sometimes melted remnants of old clothes were used for wicks, threaded through them and twisted. Medieval chronicles often mention problems with candle burning due to poor wicks. Smoke and odor caused discomfort. The flame flickered and often went out. This could be a real challenge on long winter nights. Over time, with the development of crafts and trade, the range of materials for wicks expanded and the quality improved. But even then, craftsmanship was still worth its weight in gold, because not only brightness, but also safety depended on the wick. A poorly made wick could lead to fire. For medieval man, light was not just a comfort, but a necessity of life. And the wick, seemingly such a small detail, became the main conductor of light into the world of darkness and cold night. Today, when we look at the flame of a candle or a fire lamp, it is worth remembering those who for centuries honed the art of making wicks, invisible, but such important companions of human life and survival. Bonfires and hearths in the house. In a medieval house, the fire or hearth was not just a place for cooking, it was the heart of the house, the main source of light and warmth. It was where the family gathered, where stories were told, where important matters were decided. The fire gave a sense of security and coziness in the long, cold evenings, when the weather was raging outside the walls. The hearth was usually placed in the center of the main room, the hall or kitchen. Its size and design depended on the wealth of the family and the region, but everywhere it served the same purpose, to provide a bright but controlled fire. The smoke from the fire was vented through holes in the roof or through primitive chimneys, which were just beginning to develop in the late Middle Ages. In wealthy homes and castles, hearths had already evolved into more elaborate stoves and fireplaces with stone or brick portals. These structures allowed for better control of fire and heat, as well as efficient smoke removal. In such fireplaces, the fire burned bright and long, illuminating a large room and warming the stone walls. For most peasants, the hearth remained a simple hole dug in the floor, covered with stones. They kindled wood or coals there and placed rough benches and wooden tables around it. The light from the open fire was soft and wavering, but often barely enough to distinguish the faces of those gathered. Open fire had its limitations. First, it was a source of danger. Sparks could fly out and set fire to floorboards or dried cloths. Secondly, the brightness of the fire varied. The flames flickered because of the wind, or died out. Such lighting made it impossible to do fine work or reading for long periods of time. In addition, the fire needed constant supervision. Fallen embers could go out, and without firewood and fresh air, the fire would quickly go out. In winter, it was especially important to keep the fire burning. The survival of the whole family depended on it. Historical chronicles often mention how in winter conditions peasants tried to concentrate all their energies on maintaining the hearth. In monasteries and rich houses, special servants watched over the furnaces so that an even fire always burned in the halls. It is interesting that in some regions of Europe, special constructions were used. Hearths with iron grates and hooks suspended over them, on which it was possible to cook food and dry clothes, simultaneously using fire as a source of heat and light. Stoves and fireplaces often became the center of domestic life, around which all life took place, from meals to needlework and family gatherings. They were also used for drying herbs, making medicinal infusions, and kneading dough. At the same time, smoke entering the dwelling forced people to look for ways to improve ventilation. By the 14th century, the first chimneys began to be built in some cities, which significantly improved the comfort of life and the quality of lighting. The elaborate stone fireplaces that appeared in castles and palaces made it possible to create large rooms with high ceilings. Such halls were lit not only by fire, but also by massive candlesticks. At that time, fire was a symbol of wealth and hospitality. But for most ordinary people, the fire in the hearth remained the most accessible and indispensable source of light. It allowed not only to see in the dark, but also to keep warm, cook food, and create an atmosphere of comfort. Even when more modern lamps appeared, fires and hearths did not lose their importance. They continued to play an important role in everyday life, bringing families together and sustaining life in the harshest conditions. As a result, we can say that the hearth in the house is not just a place for fire, but the living center of medieval life, where light and darkness, heat and cold, safety and risk met. And the ability to control this fire was one of the most important skills of medieval man. Use of olive oil and oils for lighting. In the days when the darkness of night was deep and impenetrable, oil lamps were one of the most important sources of light. They were much more stable and convenient than an open fire and allowed for prolonged human activity after sunset. The tradition of using vegetable and animal oils for lighting goes back to antiquity, from simple communities to great civilizations. Olive oil, a special oil made from flax seeds, nuts or olives, was often used in lamps. It was easy to obtain and store, and burned brightly and for a long time. In northern regions, animal fat was popular, pork, lard, or fish oil, which had a thicker texture and burned with a distinctive odor. The choice of oil depended on the area and the availability of resources. Oil lamps were simple vessels made of clay, stone, or metal. Oil was poured into them, and a wick was inserted, a thin strip of cloth or plant fiber that was slowly immersed in the oil and pulled towards the flame. This method of lighting allowed for an even, soft light that blinked less and did not fade without constant maintenance. There were many varieties of oil lamps. Simple peasant homes used small bowls or cups made of clay. In wealthy homes and monasteries, more elaborate metal lamps with lids and stands were used, which protected the flame from the wind and allowed the lamp to be carried without the risk of extinguishing the fire. Historical finds from excavations show that oil lamps have been used since ancient times. For example, in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, vessels with remnants of olive oil and wicks were found. In Europe, starting with the Roman Empire, lamps became a common attribute of domestic life, and their form and device were gradually improved. In the Middle Ages, lamps used in churches were of particular importance. The oil for them was often supplied from monastic farms, where oil seeds were grown and bees were kept for wax. In such lamps, the flame had a symbolic meaning. It represented the light of spirituality and divine presence. Oil lamps were characterized by their convenience and mobility. They could be suspended from the ceiling, placed on a table or windowsill, making lighting flexible and practical. However, they required constant maintenance. The wick had to be trimmed periodically to prevent the flame from smoking, and the oil had to be refilled. Among the limitations of oil lighting are the smell of burning grease and the risk of fire. An improperly maintained wick could create a lot of smoke, and spilled oil could cause a fire. Nevertheless, for many people, it was the most reliable source of light in the night. Interestingly, different regions use their own unique blends of oils. In Scandinavia, fish oil extracted from the depths of the sea was often used, while in the southern regions of Europe, olive oil, known for its purity and light burning, was used. Historians note that the spread of oil lamps contributed to the development of households and crafts. In the evenings, people could sew, read scrolls, or simply talk in soft light, which was impossible with candles or an open fire. Thus, olive oil and animal fats became an integral part of medieval man's life. They gave light in the dark, kept warm, and created a cozy atmosphere. Although today they have been replaced by electricity and modern technology, these oils have remained a symbol of simplicity, craftsmanship, and survival in history. After all, the oil lamp is not just a household item, but a bridge between nature and man, a reflection of the ability to use what is available and create light in the most challenging conditions. Metal and clay candlesticks, protection of fire, and symbols of home comfort. During the Middle Ages, when artificial light did not exist, candlesticks became indispensable household items. They were made of clay and metals, most often bronze, copper, or iron. These materials ensured not only durability, but also safety when using open fire in wooden and thatched buildings. Handmade and kiln-fired clay candlesticks were simple and accessible. They had a wide and stable base to prevent the candle from tipping over, and a small recess or ledge to hold the wick securely in place. This design minimized the risk of fire, which was critical in wooden houses with flammable materials around. Metal candlesticks were more durable and often decorated with decorative carvings, engraving, or forging. They often had legs or handles which allowed the fire to be carried around the house without the risk of burning. Some candlesticks were equipped with metal reflectors, shields that directed and amplified the light, improving the illumination of rooms, especially those without windows or where they were small. This allowed to significantly save fire and make the space more functional. Archaeological excavations of medieval towns and castles regularly find such candlesticks, which testifies to the widespread use of these objects. In monasteries, candlesticks often had religious significance. They were decorated with crosses, images of saints, or symbols of faith, emphasizing the importance of light as a symbol of divine presence. For the medieval peasant or townsman, a candlestick was more than just a utilitarian object. It was part of home comfort and safety. In an era when one small spark could lead to a fire, candlesticks helped to protect life and property by keeping light and warmth in harsh conditions. Their shape and material reflected the social status of the owner, and their craftsmanship showed the development of the crafts of the time. Thus, metal and clay candlesticks became key elements of everyday life, combining functionality, aesthetics, and symbolism, helping people of the Middle Ages to cope with the darkness and create a space for living and working by firelight. Reflectors and mirrors for light amplification, the art of expanding darkness. In medieval dwellings where every ray of light was worth its weight in gold, simple reflectors were a real lifesaver. To intensify the light of a candle or oil lamp, craftsmen and peasants used sheets of polished metal, copper, tin, or silver, which were placed behind the fire source. These reflectors, often handmade, were convex or flat in shape, directing light in the right direction and increasing its brightness. In dark rooms or monastic cells, such devices help to better illuminate workplaces, allowing you to read, embroider, or do other things after sunset. Archaeological finds in the medieval settlements of Northern Europe and Britain testify to the widespread use of metal reflectors already from the 9th centuries. In one of the excavated Viking houses, a whole set of bronze plates was found, which served exactly for this purpose. In Christian monasteries, reflectors were often decorated with carvings and symbols of faith, thus making light not only practical, but also symbolic. Sometimes even polished wooden or bone plates, which served as cheap alternatives to metal, were used to amplify the light. The simplicity and affordability of these methods made reflectors a popular means of lighting in the homes of the poor and artisans. So medieval man, using even minimal resources, found ways to expand the boundaries of darkness and prolong daylight. The small glint of metal behind the candle became an important element of everyday life, giving hope and warmth in cold and gloomy dwellings. Luminaries in religious and public buildings, the light of faith and power. In medieval churches and monasteries, lighting played a special, almost sacred role. Here, light was not just a way of seeing in the dark, but a symbol of divine presence, purity, and spiritual enlightenment. Oil lamps and wax candles burned on altars and in sacristies, illuminating icons, crosses, and sacred books, creating a special atmosphere of prayer and contemplation. Monks and priests turned to light not only for practicality, but also as a symbol of spiritual purification. In monastic cells, a soft fire helped scribes continue their work in dim light, which helped preserve and spread knowledge in an era when books were rare and precious. Archaeological excavations at sites such as Clairvaux Abbey, France, or Westminster Abbey, England, give us a glimpse of the richness of church lamps. Metal candlesticks with rich ornaments, sometimes encrusted with precious stones, testify to the importance of fire in church rituals and the status of the church as a spiritual and political force. The rituals of lighting candles during services, feasts, and fasts were of special importance. They strengthened the faith of the community and emphasized the importance of church events. Candles burned continuously in chapels, symbolizing the continuity of prayer and the presence of the Holy Spirit. In public buildings such as castle halls, town halls, and the courts of rulers, light also had its own symbolic meaning. Here, larger oil lamps and complex systems of pendant lights were used to illuminate large spaces and create an impression of power and order. Lights in such places not only had a practical function, but also emphasized the status of the owner and the importance of the decisions made here. Thus, in religious and public buildings, light played a dual role. It was both a source of physical illumination and an important symbol that united the faithful and emphasized power during the Middle Ages. Night lanterns and portable lights, light on the road and protection against darkness. When night fell and darkness enveloped the medieval streets, villagers and townspeople needed a source of light to travel safely outside. Portable lamps and lanterns became indispensable companions for travelers, guards, and craftsmen working late into the night. These lanterns were made of improvised materials, most often wood or wrought iron. To protect the fire from wind and rain, inserts made of wax, parchment, and later thin glass, a rarity available only in wealthy cities, were used. Inside was a wick soaked in animal fat or vegetable oil, which burned brightly enough but quickly consumed fuel. Portable lamps were usually carried in the hands, hung from long poles or attached to the belt. Guards on guard were obliged to carry such lanterns. The chronicles of 20th century England record decrees of the city authorities, obliging the watchmen to illuminate the streets to prevent crime and fire. The lanterns also served as a sign of order. Their light drove away fear and evil. Despite their importance, the light from such lamps was dim and limited, and wind often extinguished the fire, making night walks risky. Nevertheless, portable lamps remained a key element of medieval life, helping to navigate in the dark and maintain a sense of safety during nighttime travel. Light-saving techniques and safety. In the medieval world, fire was both a source of life and a potential disaster. Every ray of light, whether from a candle, lamp, or fire, required valuable resources: beeswax, fat, oil, or wood fuel. Peasants and townspeople were extremely careful about fuel consumption, realizing that it was always in short supply, especially during cold winters and periods of prolonged drought. Medieval houses often had small windows glazed with sparse parchment or covered with thin waxed cloth to retain heat and let in daylight. This maximized natural light and reduced the need for artificial light in the evening. Lights were lit only when absolutely necessary. At meals, while working or praying, special attention was paid to the design of candlesticks and oil lamps. Metal stands with deep trays trapped drops of grease or oil, preventing the burning of wooden floors or thatch. Some candlesticks had glass or ceramic reflectors to direct light where it was needed, reducing wastage. The practice of adjusting the length of the wick was also widely used. A wick that was too long burned brightly, but quickly consumed fuel and produced a lot of soot and smoke. By cutting the wick shorter, farmers achieved a slow and even burn, saving resources and reducing the risk of smoke. Monasteries, which were the guardians of knowledge, carefully recorded advice on saving light and preventing fires. It contained advice on the storage and use of wax and oil, and on fire control in large libraries and chapels, for a fire could destroy unique manuscripts and cultural treasures. In addition, the inhabitants of medieval settlements took into account seasonal changes. In winter, when the day is short, saving light was especially important. They often lit fires in their houses only for a few hours in the evening, and then tried to use the heat from it for heating. In summer, on the other hand, They tried to make the most of the long daylight hours to reduce night lighting. Thus, lighting in the medieval house was a complex science based on experience, tradition, and knowledge of natural conditions. It required careful attention to fuel consumption and constant concern for safety, for one careless step could lead to fire and destruction. These ancient techniques, despite their simplicity, are surprising in their thoughtfulness and efficiency, which makes them relevant today. Medieval lighting is more than just fire in the dark. It is a story of survival, wisdom, and human ingenuity that allowed people to create comfort and safety in the harshest of times. Each lamp, each candle is a small victory over darkness and cold, a symbol of hope and warmth in the heart of home. Immersing ourselves in these ancient techniques, we not only learn how our ancestors lived, but also draw lessons that are still relevant today. If you are interested in traveling through time and discovering the forgotten secrets of the Middle Ages, if you appreciate real stories about life, struggle, and survival, subscribe to our channel. New discoveries and exciting stories from the past that help you understand the present are waiting for you here. Don't miss out. There are many more amazing things to come.